Welcome back, guys. Today, we're going to continue to look at the build-up to the American Revolution. The colonies finally said, enough, we want to be our own country. But before we get there, we got to look at, again, we got to go through these causes. So we've talked about the French and Indian War. In the last video, we talked about the proclamation and how they couldn't go past the Appalachian Mountains and how this upsets the colonies. And so now we're going to look at some of the things that happened as a result of the colonies either not listening or kind of pushing back. So we're going to do this in a foldable form. You're going to fold it like this. You're going to cut it so you have 4 flaps. And the title, Initial Acts Against the Colonies. So these are the 4 initial acts that King George takes against the colonies here in what would become the United States. And so we start with the Quartering Act. Quartering Act, we're going to talk about what that is. The Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, and the Declaratory Act. Okay? So, again, Quartering Act, Sugar Act, Stamp Act, Declaratory Act. Okay? And we're going to talk about how each of these kind of build and create this anger and mistrust of the colonies, or from the colonies. Now, the Quartering Act first. The Quartering Act, you can see it here, explains that the British government was able to send troops here. King George upset that the colonies wouldn't follow his proclamation of 1763, and we're still trying to push past the Appalachian Mountains. He sends these British troops over here, 10,000 of them, probably more, but 10,000. And he finds that finding places for these troops to stay or to live is very expensive. And again, Britain is already in debt because of the French and Indian War. And so he signs the Quartering Act, which said that by order of the British government, all colonists must allow British troops to, and these are what the colonists had to allow these troops to do, stay in their homes, use whatever supplies they needed, let them stay as long as they need, and provide them with food. And so these were 4 things that the colonists had to do, whether they wanted that soldier there or not. They didn't have a say. And so if the British soldier showed up, said, I'm going to stay here, the owners or those that lived there didn't have any say, weren't able or allowed to be like, no, you're not. And he could come in, show up, use whatever supplies they had, eat all their food, and just hang out until he got tired of being there. And he moved on to the next house where he was able to do the same thing. And so the Quartering Act kind of puts the colonists on alert, and it feels like they're kind of being micromanaged and micro-watched. And the colonies don't like it. But the Quartering Act isn't making money for the British. And so what you get next is the Sugar Act. And this is a tax on sugar, molasses, which is similar to syrup, coffee, and indigo. Major things that the colonists were getting. And so what people, to try and get around having to pay this extra tax, the colonists are trying to smuggle. And because they were smuggling illegal goods and trying to get around paying this tax, King George once again gets upset and angry and creates a writ of assistance. And the writ of assistance allowed the British soldiers, which are already there, or British individuals working for the king, to search a home just on maybe you have smuggled goods. You might have something in here. I don't have any proof, but I'm going to check. And they were able to do so because of this writ of assistance, and would allow these officers to legally go in, not just to a smuggler's home, but to anyone that they believed could have been a smuggler, walk in, check. If you had it, sweet, they did their job, they had it right. If you didn't, it was like, oh, that sucks, sorry. You can see again, the colonists are starting to get upset because they feel like that Britain isn't necessarily looking out for them. Instead, they're just trying to use them to get money. But it doesn't stop there. The next one is the Stamp Act. All paper goods, all of them, from playing cards to marriage licenses to newspapers. Playing cards, wills, marriage licenses, pamphlets, newspapers, they all have to have a tax stamp on them. And then the stamps would also be sold separately as a tax. So the paper goods were taxed. The stamp, to get the stamp put on there that you paid the tax, was also a charge. So essentially you're getting double taxed. And so again, the colonists start to get upset and they start to wonder, why do you get the tax us without us having any say in what's going on? We don't have a say in Parliament. If we were in England, we would, but we don't have a say in Parliament. We're over here, and you get to make all the decisions for us despite not being here. And again, King George is like, well, we got all this debt. We need you to help us pay it off. And so you see the continuous taxing, and this is where you get the no taxation without representation. The colonists want to be represented in Parliament. They start to boycott. They start to boycott British goods. They start to boycott British goods. It starts in your major cities, New York, Boston, Philadelphia. But they're boycotting British goods because they believe that if they could not use the British goods, they wouldn't have to pay the tax. And therefore, you're hurting not only Britain, but the producers of those goods. And so they hoped that by boycotting the British goods, the producers would go to Britain and almost beg that these acts be repealed or taken away. And it ends up working. A petition ends up getting written that asks Parliament to repeal the Stamp and the Sugar Act. They end up doing this, but while taking those two away, they add the Declaratory Act, and the Declaratory Act says that Parliament had total control in the colonies. They had total political control, which doesn't really make sense because the colonies had their own governments. They had total economic control, which again doesn't make sense because the colonies were conducting economics on their own. They had total governmental control, social control. Parliament had full 100% unchecked control in the colonies. We're going to stop here for today, but you do have a reading that's going to go more in depth into these acts and the reactions of the colonists. So make sure you check Canvas for those. And you're going to have a discussion board question. We're going to see who's on whose side. Should the colonists have had to pay for the war? Should they have not had to pay for the war? Should Britain be allowed to tax the colonies? Should they not? We're going to see who's on what side, who can argue why they are right. And who knows, there may be extra credit for the person that's able to make the best argument on each side. All right? If you have any questions, reach out to me. And as always, you have a great day.